This is an introduction to the Healthy Streets Design Check. Welcome, I'm Lucy Saunders. I'm a public health specialist by background, have many years experience working with the transport and built environment sectors, and I work with cities and regions around the world in implementing the Healthy Streets approach. This session's introducing the new Healthy Streets Check for England. This tool is free to download from healthystreets.com. And this session will give you an overview of this tool. If you'd like comprehensive training, you can email training@healthystreets.com. Almost all of your questions about the tool are actually answered within the tool itself. So read it carefully from cover to cover before you get started. If you have any queries, you can email contact@healthystreets.com. This session covers the policy context, what is Healthy Streets, Healthy Streets tools, the design check itself, how it was made, its strengths and limitations and how to measure with it, and finishes with a case study. But first, the policy context. The Healthy Streets approach has been around since 2012. It's been endorsed by leading organisations in the transport and health sector in the UK and around the world, and it's included in the strategies, policies and design guidance of many local authorities, including most recently adopted by Norwich, pictured here. But you may be most aware of Healthy Streets from Greater London, where the approach has been most well established. In London, the Healthy Streets approach is embedded in all of the statutory strategies. It's the framework for the Mayor's transport strategy, it's a core policy in the spatial plan, and the way that it is embedded across all different sectors reflects what Healthy Streets is all about. It's about not just one professional group doing their job differently, but about cross-sector working to change the whole system to deliver better places for people. The national policy context in the UK is set by the Department for Transport, who commissioned this Healthy Streets Design Check for England. This arose from many officers around the country taking up the offer of Healthy Streets Foundation training in 2020 and asking for a tool that they could use in their local authority areas to implement the Healthy Streets approach. As a result, we developed and launched this new Healthy Streets Design Check for England. It's already been recommended as a useful tool in the local transport note 120, published by Department for Transport last year. And the design tool is specifically aligned with this design guidance. So the design tool actually helps people who are trying to implement national design guidance to ensure that they're doing so. Before we look at the design check tool in more detail, we need to be clear on what the tool is based. And the foundation of this is the Healthy Streets approach. Healthy Streets, in a nutshell, is these 10 Healthy Streets indicators. They're not a list of things that you find on a street. If you look carefully at each of the indicators, you can see that they describe the different aspects of how people feel on streets. And they give us a clue as to what kind of experience we need to give people if we want to create truly healthy places for them. We have a responsibility to make streets safe and healthy environments, so we need to ensure they're accessible to all, that they have safe noise and air quality levels, and that road danger is minimised. But protecting people from the greatest public health threats is not enough. We also need to support them to be physically active each day and to ensure our public spaces are welcoming and accessible to all. There are critical aspects of the human experience that need to be considered in relation to all streets. Do people feel they have shade and shelter when they need it, or space to stop and rest, things to see and do? These are essential to get people choosing to walk and cycle, but they're also vital for creating livable places. The 10 indicators are what we need to focus on to make streets inclusive and to support mode shift away from cars for short journeys. These 10 indicators are not specific to certain kinds of streets or places because they're describing aspects of the human experience, and the human is found universally across the world in different kinds of environments. These indicators are applicable wherever in the world those humans may be. And the Healthy Streets approach is not in opposition with car use. Cars are great for some journeys, and they're an essential part of the transport mix in many places. But when we create places primarily for car use, we erode our living environment and our travel choices, and Healthy Streets seeks to address that and redress the balance. The Healthy Streets approach aims to create places that primarily meet basic human needs, and this will include car use in many places. How is the Healthy Streets approach new and different? Well, it's not about providing the minimum space where people could technically walk or could technically cycle. It's thinking about the experience that human beings have in street environments. So in this picture here, we can see the people walking and cycling have been given the bare minimum. Their experience is not being prioritized. It's technically possible to walk and cycle, but it's probably still easier and more rewarding to drive for short journeys. And many aspects of the human experience are not being prioritized, such as air quality and noise. Being on the street is not going to be a relaxing and rewarding experience for people here. Healthy Streets is about rethinking our streets from a people-first perspective rather than a cars-first perspective. So rather than accommodating people in a car-dominated environment, we prioritise them. And here we've got two examples of side road entrances. The one on the left shows people being technically accommodated with a drop curb that's off the desire line. And on the right-hand side, an environment where people who are walking along the street are being prioritised. And here's another example. Here we have a street where technically it's possible for some people to walk along this street, but many people would find this inaccessible, and certainly they wouldn't feel that they're being valued in this environment. We try and prioritise the human experience. Here you can breathe out, you can continue your conversation. Some extra space taken away from the cars, and this has created a better environment for people. The 10 Healthy Streets indicators are what must be prioritised in all decision making. While the design check looks at one particular aspect of decision making, I'm now going to take you through the different ways that we need to change decision making across the board to deliver the Healthy Streets approach. So first, people often immediately think of changing our standard design practices. And here we have an example for easy to cross of a narrowed side road entrance with a continuous footway across it. This is a way that we can change our standard design practice to deliver Healthy Streets, but it's only one part of a much bigger system. We also need to think about our maintenance program. So here we have an example of a street with some mature trees that will provide shade and shelter and some greening. All positive things. It has to be well maintained though. So how are we making sure that we are resourcing a good maintenance program and ensuring that street environments stay in good conditions throughout the year and over the years? For places to stop and rest, we have the example of the role of working with the private sector, working with businesses. What can they do to help to support Healthy Streets? There's a win-win scenario here. We've got places to stop and rest being provided by local businesses. For not too noisy, let's think for a moment about how we're changing the vehicle mix and the volume and speed of traffic. We've got an example of an electric cargo bike being used for deliveries. Freight and servicing have a real influence on how streets feel, so making sure that we're managing them with people at the forefront of our minds is key. For people choosing to walk and cycle, often we focus on the paths and the routes that we provide for walking and cycling, but we need to think about all aspects of the experience. And here's an example of where an on-street car parking space has been repurposed for cycle parking. This provides secure, weather-protected shelter for residents' bikes, conveniently placed in front of their homes. And for people feel safe, this is not just thinking about road danger, but it's also thinking about all aspects of safety, including social safety. We often think of behaviour change programmes as being important for the community, and here we have an example of a behaviour change programme being offered to members of the community, building their confidence in cycling. But in addition to this, there's also a lot of work that can be done working with businesses and professional drivers, and also the many professionals who have a role in how streets are designed and managed. For things to see and do, let's think about the role of the buildings that are facing onto the street. We've got the role of architects, building managers, and residents and owners themselves. What can they do to support healthy streets? Here we've got an example of a resident contributing to things to see and do with their vibrant front garden. And people feel relaxed. What's the role of the planning system here and developers? Well, this is an opportunity for us to get things right first time. New developments can be relaxing places for people of all ages with planting and play facilities, step-free and wide footways, low vehicle volumes and speeds. And clean air is a moment for us to dwell on the role of citywide policies. Often with healthy streets, we think about individual people on individual streets, but those citywide policies can have a huge influence on it. And here we've got the example from London of the ultra low emission zone, which is a citywide policy that has significant impacts on people on streets across the region. And finally, everyone feels welcome. How do we engage the community in looking at their streets and thinking about them differently, thinking about them not just as places for moving and storing cars, but places that can support community cohesion and connectedness. And this is a temporary closure of a residential street led by the community. If you want to learn more about the Healthy Streets approach and the 10 Healthy Streets indicators, you can join a Healthy Streets training course where you'll develop more expert knowledge on the indicators, how to measure them and how to improve them. While the Healthy Streets indicators are universal, how we measure them is tailored to different tools for different professional groups, different purposes and different geographies. So the Healthy Streets tools are developed to enable different people in different places apply the Healthy Streets approach. We endeavour to make as many of these freely available to all via the Healthy Streets website. And here are some examples for you. There's a qualitative street assessment, an on-street survey, a household survey, and a citywide index. Coming next will be a new community app for members of the community to score streets themselves. But for now, we're going to be focusing on the design check. The Healthy Streets design check has been developed for England. There's also a version for Australia. We should be clear right now that this is not new design guidance. It's to be used by design and engineering professionals. It's been specifically written with those audiences and to ensure that they are meeting the needs of those professional groups in their everyday work. These are not tools for the general public. And this tool is used for assessing how well designs are prioritising the Healthy Streets indicators. It only gives a very limited picture of street design, and for that reason, it's only useful for very limited purposes. Let's think about its uses. Its main use and the main feedback I get from designers is that this tool helps them to think about the whole street and the human experience and shift away from a focus on individual nodes and movement. It can be used in performance management and target setting. It helps to build transparency and trust with the public because it's framed around these 10 Healthy Streets indicators, which are easy to communicate and easy to connect with. When the public see that we're talking in the same language internally as we are externally, not only can they join those conversations, but they have more trust. This tool helps to facilitate conversations between stakeholders who are working on designs. They may come from different professional backgrounds, but it provides one common language and an easy way for people to talk about designs. And it clearly communicates the benefits of improving streets across multiple policy priorities. We don't just try to improve our streets from a transport perspective, from a public health perspective, or from an environmental perspective. We're often thinking about a whole range of different priorities, including economic and social priorities. And the Healthy Streets indicators are a broad framing mechanism which can tie all these different policy priorities together. So what is measured in this tool? The volume and speed of motorised traffic, the mix of vehicles, cycle safety at junctions, location and type of crossings, footway quality and width and cycle space quality and width, cycle parking, street lighting, public seating, trees, green infrastructure, measures to reduce through traffic and bus stop facilities on those streets that have bus services running on them. You might be wondering, how were these chosen? This is only a selection of the many things that you could measure to assess a design. First of all of our metrics need to be applicable to all streets in England. They need to be things that can be consistently measured across all these different streets and all these different geographies and contexts. And they need to be cheap and easy for the designer to measure so that they don't add an additional burden of work. They need to be within the control of designers to influence. If we're going to be scoring someone's design, it's important that they feel that they have the opportunity to increase that score. And they need to be balanced across all the 10 Healthy Streets indicators. Finally, because this tool is used both to assess existing streets and proposed designs, every metric has to be measurable both for an existing street and for a proposed street. You might be now wondering, what do they look like? Well, there are 19 of them. Each metric can be scored 3, 2, 1, or 0. And for each, there is a correct answer. There's very specific guidance on how we measure each of these metrics. So if you're not sure what the answer is, then make sure that you've read the guidance first. There can be some really useful tips in there that will help you to work out whether you're scoring a 3, a 2, a 1, or a 0 in this instance. There should be little or no room for the application of professional judgment or your personal opinion. And you must write in the notes next to each metric how you chose your score. This helps you to remember how you came up with your score, but it also helps others to have confidence in the score that you've chosen. So let's take an example, the quality of the footway surface, and this is measured at the weakest point on the street. So if you had an existing street, you'd be walking the full length of that street to identify the weakest point in terms of the footway surface. If you felt the street had very good quality footway at the weakest point, it might score a 3 for a smooth non-slip surface. If there are a few minor defects, it will be a 2. Many minor defects would score 1. And if anywhere on that street you can find a level difference of 15 millimeters or more, then the street automatically would score a 0. Quality assurance is very important. The tool is only of value if it has been correctly completed and the information in that tool is actually acted upon. So any other designer should be able to pick up a check that you've completed and understand how you chose the score for each metric and to be able to validate it for themselves. Never take a Healthy Streets check score on face value. If someone presents a Healthy Streets check score to you, ask to read the full check and make sure yourself that you're happy that it has been completed correctly. There are different points in the design process when you can use the Healthy Streets design check. The first point would be right at the beginning when you're assessing an existing street. This might be because you're planning on making some changes to it. You can use the information that you collect from your assessment of an existing street to identify the weaknesses that could potentially be improved in your design. And you can write this then into the specification for the project. You can then run the Healthy Streets design check on each of the different options that you develop, and that will help you to consider the Healthy Streets impact of your project alongside all the other aspects of your options appraisal. When you have your chosen design, it's worth checking that you've covered off what you intended to in the specification. And then once you have built your street, it's very important you go back and do the check again to see whether anything got lost in the build process, to make sure that you did achieve the result that you'd hoped for or better. When you've completed the Healthy Streets design check, you will produce a score that looks like this. It's presented as a visual on the left-hand side and in a table format that you can see on the right-hand side here. The most important information is the overall Healthy Streets score, which is highlighted in yellow. Looking at the individual indicators can help the designer to see where the biggest potential for an increase in the score might be. For example, here it's places to stop and rest, where the score has gone from 0 to 8. But from the perspective of the general public and from your stakeholders, what they're going to care about most is how much healthier have you made this environment? How much is the human experience going to be improved through this? And that's where you need to be focusing on the Healthy Streets score. Gives you that global overview. If you want to start digging down into how you can increase the score, there is a table that's included in the tool which shows you transparently which metrics are contributing to which of the indicators. So you can see down the left-hand side, every metric is listed. Across the top, every indicator is listed. And you can therefore see which metrics contribute to which indicators. You'll see that some indicators, every metric contributes to them. Some, it's only a selection. Some metrics contribute to a lot of the indicators, some only to a few. And this is the weighting that is baked into this tool. It's very transparent. You can see what are the things you should be focusing on to have the biggest overall impact in terms of healthy streets. You might be curious as to how this tool was made. So just to briefly cover this, this is a new tool for England. It's been commissioned by the Department for Transport, and it was developed with officers from local authorities working across the country in a range of different geographical contexts. As well as the officers from local authorities, the subject matter experts from Sustrans and Living Streets were putting in their specialist advice to the development process as well. And the draft tool was reviewed by the technical experts at Department for Transport to ensure the tool worked well and was fully aligned with national guidance. The draft tool was then tested with officers working on the ground in Norwich, applying it to real schemes that they were working on to identify what could we do to improve the usability of the tool. And since the tool's been launched, it's already being applied by Sustrans officers working with local authorities. It's important to be aware of the strengths and limitations of any tool. And with the Healthy Streets Design Check, the strengths are that it is cheap, quick, and easy to do. For a designer who's trying this out for the first time, it could take them as long as an hour to read the tool in full before they fill it in. But once you're using this tool on a regular basis with designs that you're familiar with, it can take as little as 15 minutes to complete. This is a rare example of a tool that's able to objectively measure harms to health. It's very difficult to attribute street design to health outcomes because so many other things influence health outcomes, but this is the best tool that we have available for showing that link between street design and layout and human health. The tool tells you at baseline what you need to consider changing. It's not a tool that you apply retrospectively to identify opportunities for next time. You can know before you get going what it is that you need to be doing differently. And you can use it to compare different options for designs. The tool can be used not just on permanent changes, but if you've got a one-off or event or a temporary change, you can run the tool on this. You can even run the tool on how a street performs during the day and during the night if you think there's a particular difference there. And the tool can be used for new development. So even when there's no existing street, you can use this tool to identify how you're going to design your streets to get a good Healthy Streets check score, and you can run your proposals through the check. The tool measures all streets the same, so you can compare many different streets and know that the numbers that you're looking at are comparable. There are, of course, limitations to the Healthy Streets Design Check that need to be borne in mind. First of all, it doesn't directly measure real life experience. It's relying on proxy measures. Many things influence how people use streets in the real world, not just the design. So we do our best to use design measures as proxies for what we think will affect how humans use that environment. But there will be other factors that are outside of the control of the designer. And so we can't be guaranteed that a really good Healthy Streets check score is going to result in an environment where lots of people are walking and cycling and spending time in the street. This tool only measures what designers can influence, and therefore it's very limited in its scope. Issues such as policing, enforcement, maintenance, behaviour change programs, all these things are going to influence street environments and how they're used and managed on a day-to-day basis, but they're not within the scope of this tool. This tool only includes what can be easily and consistently measured. And there's many aspects of street design that can't be easily and consistently measured across all different kinds of streets across a whole country. So this is only a selection of important metrics. The tool doesn't show the impacts of a design change on the wider area. So if you're going to be having an influence, for example, on traffic flows, it's important that you're thinking about running that check on all the streets that you think may have a knock-on impact as a result of your redesign, so that you can see whether you're actually resulting in an increase or a decrease in the Healthy Streets Check score on surrounding streets. And it's important to remember that this tool does not reflect the quality of the design and the materials that are used. Design is a very complex process, and a very simple checklist like this is not going to capture and reflect the quality of a good design. It does, however, give you a global sense of broadly how healthy one street is compared with another, and whether a design is healthier than an existing street environment. So how do we measure using this tool? The first three metrics, you can use traffic count data if it's available. If you don't have traffic count data available, there's guidance in the tool on how you can estimate your scores for metrics 1 to 3. Metrics 4 to 12 are based on the weakest geographical point on the street. So for an existing street, you may well want to visit the street and have a look at it. And you can also work out from plans for a proposal where the weakest point is likely to be. Let me give you an example for this. One of the metrics is looking at the effective width of the space for walking. And for this, we're measuring the weakest point. This aerial view shows you a building in black with light grey footway and a dark grey carriageway. You might think it would make sense to be measuring from the building line to the curb edge for the space for walking, but this is not what we're looking at. We're looking at the weakest point. And if you have a look at this street, you can see we've got bins and trees and benches and signposts that are all having an impact on the effective width of the space for walking. So in fact, what we measure with this metric is the narrowest continuous space for walking. For metrics 13 to 18, we're measuring the street as a whole. We're measuring, for example, how long the distance is between one seat and the next, what proportion of the street has street lighting on it, those kinds of things. So we're looking at the street as a whole. And metric 19 is only applicable on streets that have bus routes on. If the street you're assessing or the street that you're proposing won't have a bus route, you don't include this metric and your score will be adjusted accordingly. I really recommend that you think about undertaking the Healthy Streets Foundation training. This gives you a comprehensive introduction to all aspects of applying the Healthy Streets approach. It's an online course. It's delivered through a series of seminars and tutorials in 6 modules over 6 weeks. During the course, you get to try out many of the Healthy Streets tools. It's been completed by over 100 officers across England and 100 more in Australia. It gets a 95% approval rating for the people who've used the tool, the training so far. And if you're interested, you can contact training@healthystreets.com. If you're specifically interested just in the Healthy Streets design check, there's also a focus course that looks just at this design process. For this course, there are 5 sessions over 3 weeks. Again, it's an online course. It gives detailed guidance on measuring each of the metrics. You get to try out using the tool and get personalized feedback on your accuracy. And there's a lot of advice on how to increase your scores when working in different contexts and how to defend the results. Again, if you're interested in this, then contact training@healthystreets.com. Finally, we're going to look at an example. And for my example, I thought I would show you how you can use this tool when comparing options for one scheme. The context that I was given was to come up with a low-cost measure that was going to have a significant uplift in the Healthy Streets check score. And the street on which I was going to be making this change is a very typical residential street for England. The first thing I did, of course, was to run the Healthy Streets check for designers on the street as it is. And when I did this assessment, I found that the baseline score was 29 out of 100. This might seem like a very low number to you, but for the UK, because our streets have traditionally been designed to put cars first, 29 is quite a typical score for many streets across the UK. We're really looking to try and push those scores up through taking this more people-centered approach. Now, the tool identified a number of positive aspects which helped to get the score as high as 29. And these were that it had low traffic volumes, low traffic speeds, it had street lighting and parking restrictions. However, there were a number of aspects of the street that brought the score down, which were highlighted by the check tool. First of all, there were many footway defects and pinch points. There were carriageway defects and long distances between places to sit down. There was a lack of tactile paving. It was not a step-free environment, and there was a lack of greening. So my first design solution to try and get a big increase in the Healthy Streets check score using a temporary change at low cost was to add one traffic filter. And this was what the traffic filter looked like. As you can see, it's a somewhat enhanced traffic filter. It's not simply a bollard, it also has a bench, planters, and a drop curb has been introduced at this crossing point. So this change to the street was put through the Healthy Streets design check, and the results showed that the score for this street increased from 29 to 39. This was a 10-point increase in the Healthy Streets check score, which given the budget was really an impressive uplift in the Healthy Streets check score. On another street with a different traffic mix and a higher traffic volume, it would have had an even greater impact on the score. You can see that for things to see and do, the score increased quite significantly, while for places to stop and rest, the score only increased a modest amount. And if you were curious as to why this was, you can have a look at how the score is generated on the separate tab, which would show you that actually for things to see and do, the metrics that contributed were public seating, trees and green infrastructure, and both green infrastructure and public seating improved with this enhanced filter. So that's why the score increased so significantly. While for places to stop and rest, the only change that would have contributed to that is only one of the 5 metrics that scored, the one for public seating. There were still pinch points on the footways. There was still a poor quality surface as well. So then I was thinking, okay, having had a look at the scores that I've achieved with my filter and seeing where there are still weaknesses, what could I do to enhance this further? If I had more money, if I had the will, could I make a further change to this street that would get the score to go even higher? And what I identified was that the crossing metrics were all scoring very poorly. So I thought I'll run this tool again to see what the score would be if I were to provide raised table crossings continuously along this street. And in this scenario, it increased a whopping 26 percentage points. So just the combination of the traffic filter and the raised table crossings with tactile paving would increase the score by 26 points. This is a really significant increase and shows the importance of looking at which elements of the baseline score are scoring poorly when you're coming up with your proposed changes. I then thought maybe I should think about a scenario where there isn't an appetite for traffic restrictions, such as the filter that was introduced. What kind of things could you do that wouldn't involve any kind of reallocation of road space away from parking or movement of vehicles, no restrictions on traffic flow? And I thought, well, let's run a scenario for adding cycle stands, benches, just resurfacing the existing footways and resurfacing the carriageway. And this check shows that even with just those more modest measures, you still get a 13-point increase in the score. So there's always things that you can do on a street to increase the Healthy Streets check score. The more ambitious you go, the more that you focus on the human experience and take those bolder measures, you'll find the more the score goes up. But what we can do is take these different options, compare them with the existing street, and use this information in conversations when we're deciding what are we going to do on the street to make it a better place for people. So, to summarise, the Healthy Streets Design Check for England is freely available for you to download now from healthystreets.com. Please read it, try it out, and if you're curious, contact healthystreets.com for some training. Thank you.